who would you harbor? It's a question that feels kind of historical. Many of our congregations, ministers, members of our congregations were part of the Underground Railroad. Who would you harbor? It's not a new question for us, but it feels like the past. And I'll tell you that I've had colleagues reach out and say, in the event that, would you help me or my family get to Canada? Who would we harbor? The rope ladder, the rope bridge that we build is built of us, the fiber of our lives and beings. Each one of them is slender and too short and breakable. And collectively, we are strong and far more powerful than we ever imagined. So, did our reading earlier make you uncomfortable, perhaps feel a little defensive? I know when I read it, I felt a bit defensive, a little accused. But why should we care what James Luther Adams said? Well, the Reverend Dr. James Luther Adams was the foremost Unitarian Universalist theologian of the 20th century. He taught generations of theological students, leaving a large body of still important work. You hear his ideas and his words from most of our ministers. If you Google his name and 5 smooth stones, you will find dozens, if not hundreds, of sermons inspired by one small piece of his work. As a young man, an American in Germany, he watched the rise of the Nazis, nearly getting himself badly beaten or killed for his naivete. So his work is particularly resonant today. He watched a society slide into populist authoritarianism and fascism. He observed how it happened, and thought extensively about how it might be resisted. Among Adams' distilled axioms from a work on the importance of our voluntary groups, something Americans have historically been peculiarly prone to, but not as much now, he wrote this: "By their groups ye shall know them." Now, at one level, that's simply affirming that you are the company you keep. Look around you. But it is a recognition that the objectives, values, and commitments of the groups we choose to join, whether we are formally members or not, shape who we are. And they announce to others much about who we are. When one meets a member of the KKK, one already knows a great deal about that person. And likewise, when one meets a UU, people already know a great deal about you. So I read Adams' words as a warning, a reflection on the nature of part of the society that we largely inhabited in the mid-20th century, and still do to a large degree. He was one of us. He knew us. He recognized a danger we need to know about and be on guard against. He warns us, so we should take note. It is inherent in the nature of the middle class that those in it aspire to respectability. That means being seen by others as being respectable, I suppose. But if you think about it, that's a tautological definition. It is a mutual admiration society. So who really sets these standards by which the middle class determines who is in and out, who is respectable? And the answer is that the rich and the powerful do, not that they truly live by them. We see this in our media. The lives of celebrities, the wealthy, the powerful, they are held up for us to see, to admire, to aspire to. And if we're honest, we know that we will never have such lives. We will never have such lives. We will not be the wealthy or the powerful or the famous. But we can dream and try to emulate and judge those who don't follow the standards of behavior that we are told that the rich live by: class, elegance, civility, and decorum. And that is a facade. People who have seen the inside of it, and I have seen some of the inside of it, know well that the rich and celebrated and the wealthy and the powerful, they're no different than the rest of us. They wake up after a bad night's sleep. They put on their pants one leg at a time. They are prone to depression, wondering who they are and what their lives are about. They are foul-mouthed, miserable, judgmental, and mean. The data proves that they are less generous than the middle class, much less generous than the poor. But we are to respect them and seek their respect. What a warped, manipulative, oppressive system, and not by accident. Adams says that the middle class is nearly fated to adopt the religion, the public practices and beliefs of the successful, to ape them, and that in doing so we abandon and betray the rest of humanity, the people abused and impoverished and used by the principalities and powers of evil. We are tempted then to join in that oppression. Temptation. Our religious commitments call on us to reject that temptation. We affirm the worth and dignity of every person, not just those who are respectable. We affirm democracy, which asserts the right of the people to political power, rather than the wealthy and the celebrated. This is a covenantal commitment to side with love. And we have other shared commitments. Reverend Allison and I agreed that we would both preach today on our common endeavor. And I believe that this all weaves together into one tapestry of faith and commitment. We, Unitarian Universalists, have been engaged in a vast project, an experiment for longer than we have actually existed. 400 years ago this year, our forebears undertook what we now call congregational polity. They tossed all the superstructure of organized religion, denied power to any ecclesiastical authorities, and asserted that congregations were the sole authorities in religious matters. This bold assertion was made in the Cambridge Platform. It's exciting reading, right, Ben? We all have to read it. And yet, here we are, still at it. We have not ever done a very good job of living up to that vision. Not yet. We tend to fall into a sort of individualistic and congregational libertarianism, a you can't make me do it and nobody can tell me anything behavior. Ever seen that? You're not alone. But the idea and the intent was not that the congregations were to be isolated authorities unto themselves. They knew that just like individuals can go off the rails spectacularly, congregations can too. Our forebears intended and called for congregations to be connected to each other, not just to some association. They'd already cast aside authorities. They wanted you connected laterally. They wanted you to be supportive of each other, to give each other the benefit of your experience, your knowledge, your skills, your insights, your time, to give each other good advice. And if and when you see your neighbors get mired down, acting foolishly, they called on you to give hard advice, what they called admonition. You can breathe. I'm not here to do that. But if you felt that the church in Manchester or Milford or Concord, any of the neighboring congregations, were really screwing up, the Cambridge platform's expectation is that you will let them know. You will do something like invite their leaders to have coffee and talk about what they're doing and how it's really screwing things up or being unfair to someone and violating our shared religious commitments, our convictions, our shared faith. Admonition is actually a form of support, the tough love kind, but a crucially important kind of love. We need to figure out how to do that better because we have never learned to do this very well. Not how to stand by and quietly shake our heads saying, well, it's not really my business, but those folks in Nashua, that congregation, what are they doing? That's not support. That's gossip. The good news is that we have been doing important work together. I believe that Nashua and Manchester are actually showing some rather cutting-edge cooperation. The first that I'll point to, getting our state action network back up off the ground running and effective. Now, it's not something we did alone, you and Manchester, but both congregations have played critical roles in setting it up and making it work, and it is having an impact. It is having an important effect on both political and justice advocacy here in New Hampshire. The second is the Sanctuary Project. You likely know that the Manchester congregation voted to be a sanctuary site and then made building renovations to make it possible to take in a refugee who needed shelter and support. That renovation was done with significant support from you, both financial and for most of the last year or so by having people engaged. More than one of you, but steadily one member of your congregation has been a member of the Sanctuary Committee in Manchester. Thank you, Paul. This is a joint project. It's larger than just us. There are other faith traditions involved. Sanctuary requires a large community, and that is a blessing. There is a muscle that is being built for real resistance in this state, and you're an important part of it. The third is the Bail Fund, now the Bail and Bond Fund, which are two congregations created in collaboration with the NAACP. When first created, New Hampshire still had a ruinous cash bail system. People deprived of their liberty simply because they were accused of a crime, not even yet charged, but unable to pay bail, were punished as if they were guilty. They lost their freedom. And as a consequence, well, what would happen to most of us if we were in jail for a couple of days without preparations? Who would pay the rent or the mortgage, pay the bills? Who would take care of and feed our children and our other dependents. For most people, missing a day or two of work without an acceptable excuse is grounds for termination. You lose your job. Missing a few days or a week's worth of work probably means not being able to pay the rent. You lose your home. And this passed for justice. This passed for justice. Merely accused of a crime, people lost homes and jobs and the custody of their children. And when they got out, perhaps because the charge was dropped, their lives were in tatters. Homeless and struggling, fighting to get children back, trying to find a new job without a car to get to that job. The bail fund was designed to save people from that, to pay those small cash bails and help people keep their lives together. It was holy work. With our support, the cash bail system has been largely done away with now in this state. The bail fund thus seemed to have been made somewhat moot. Celebrate that. That is a success. Take your victories as they come. But we learned that there were refugees, people held by ICE for similarly strained reasons, unless they could or someone else would put up large bonds, thousands of dollars, to free them while awaiting hearings for asylum. Just as with cash bail, it is an abusive system. These people can't pay, they're refugees. So they stay in jail, often for years, simply because they fled their homelands. Keeping them in jail does no one any good. We're paying for it. And the overwhelming majority of such people show up anyway for their hearings, with or without a bond, we know that. But the system demands it. So the bail fund has been expanded to pay bonds as well. You'll be being asked for more money because those bonds are absurdly large. I'm pleased to tell you that people have already begun to be freed. Luis. We're not alone. We are collaborating with other faith traditions. The work is bigger than we are, but we have a part to play. This is the sort of lateral support that those who designed the Cambridge platform envisioned. Congregations working together, sharing good and just ideas, pooling resources to make the world a better place. And if you look farther afield, you will see us, Unitarian Universalists, clergy and lay people taking other, not entirely respectable actions to save the world, committing to our collective liberation as a calling above being respectable, civil, polite, and fully law-abiding. We are doing things that move us out of our comfort zones. And in doing so, we are doing justice and making justice. We are blocking coal trains to push for the end of coal power because that coal is destroying the climate and the ecology. We are blocking pipeline and compressor station construction because the gas and oil those pipelines would carry are endangering lives and communities, polluting the land and water, and destroying the climate and the ecology. We are taking actions at and along the border in support of refugees fleeing collapsed societies where they have been raped, beaten, threatened with murder. And we are leaving water in the desert to save the lives of those who cross the border to survive. Because saving lives is a religious commitment that stands above the assertions of power and even above the law. We are not alone in this. Others are also doing this work, but we are not surrendering to the temptations and threats of the powers and principalities of evil. Adam's words, again, this time from his guiding principles for a free faith. The affirmative action, the affirmative answer of prophetic religion, which may be heard in the very midst of the doom that threatens like thunder, is that history is a struggle in dead earnest between justice and injustice, looking towards the ultimate victory in the promise and fulfillment of grace. Anyone who does not enter into that struggle with the affirmation of love and beauty misses the mark and thwarts creation as well as self-creation. We have decided, or are deciding, not to thwart creation, not to twist and distort our best and truest selves in order to be seen as fully respectable members of the middle class. And yet this is a daunting thing. The fear and the danger is real. There is a very real threat of loss, hopelessness, and failure. And we fear failure, perhaps more than anything else. That there is such fear tells you that the struggle is not certain, that the risk is real, and that what you do, what we do, matters. E.B. White, the author of Stuart Little, Charlotte's Web, and The Elements of Style, received a letter in 1973 from an admirer admitting to having lost hope, feeling despair for the world. And here's White's response. Dear Mr. Nadeau, as long as there is one upright man, as long as there is one compassionate woman, the contagion may spread and the scene is not desolate. Hope is the thing that has left us in a bad time. I shall get up Sunday morning and wind the clock as a contribution to order and steadfastness. Sailors have an expression about the weather. They say, the weather is a great bluffer. I guess the same is true of our human society. Things can look dark, then a break shows in the clouds, and all is changed, sometimes rather suddenly. It is quite obvious that the human race has made a queer mess of this planet. But as a people, we probably harbor seeds of goodness that have lain for a long time, waiting to sprout when the conditions are right. Man's curiosity, his relentlessness, his inventiveness, his ingenuity have led him into deep trouble. We can only hope that these same traits will enable him to claw his way out. Hang on to your hat, hang on to your hope, and wind the clock, for tomorrow is another day. Sincerely, E.B. White. Hang on to your hat, hang on to your hope. Do not give up the fight. The seeds of goodness in you and in others are awaiting the proper time and place and conditions to sprout. There are entire species that depend on forest fires. Only when a devastating fire burns through can the seed pods open and release their contents to sprout and grow. Ours may be such a time. Hold on, do what is right, and know that in time, every empire and every injustice fails.